Babel. The clue to the sin of Babel is in the name. Babel is from the Hebrew word that means confusion. But the Hebrew prophets loved to play with language. They would take the words of something and then find another word that sounded kind of like the original word but meant what they really wanted it to mean. So the Akkadian words, Babel, mean gate of the gods. Gate of the gods. But the Hebrews said, no. Language was confused. Babel. Let's call it that. Now, there's an important thing I have to point out, and if nothing else, I hope you remember this tonight. Well, I hope you remember all this stuff. But anyway, this is, I think, a really important point. Babel, in spite of what we've been taught, was not at Babylon. It was not at Babylon. Babylon didn't exist when the Tower of Babel was built. Nimrod was the builder of the tower. We learn this from Josephus, from other ancient traditions. The best guess is that Nimrod lived somewhere between 3,500 and 3,000 BC. That's a rough guess, don't know for sure, but somewhere in that time frame. Genesis 10:10 tells us that the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, of course, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. Now, Erech is the ancient city of Uruk, where Gilgamesh was king. Gilgamesh was 2 generations later than Nimrod. Nimrod might have been Gilgamesh's grandfather, for all we know. The land of Shinar, Sumer. He was so important, and his kingdom, Nimrod and his kingdom based in Uruk, were so important that we still call that land by that name today. We call it Iraq. Same place, 5,000 years later. That's how significant Nimrod was. And it wasn't because he thought he could build a tower tall enough to literally reach heaven. Scholars have learned in recent years that the name Babylon was actually interchangeable with the names of other cities in ancient Sumer. But here's, I think, the significant point. One of the city names that was interchanged with Babylon regularly was a city called Eridu, E-R-I-D-U. The Sumerians believed that Eridu was the very first city ever built. It was so important in their history that 2,500 years later, during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the kings of Babylon still sometimes called themselves Lugal-Nun-Ki, which means king of Eridu. So what was the deal with Eridu? Eridu was the site of the oldest and probably the biggest ziggurat, which is a Mesopotamian pyramid, ever found. So the Sumerians may well have been right. Eridu may very well have been the very first city. In fact, there are some scholars who believe that Eridu was the first urban settlement in history. Now, there's some who say, well, Jericho was founded way before that. Yes, but Jericho, even though it had walls, it was a rural, agrarian settlement. In Eridu, you actually had people doing just government business. They didn't actually have to go out in the fields and work. They were supported by the people who were out in the fields working. And why? Now, this is the location of Eridu. It's right there on the shore of what used to be the shore of the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf has moved a long, like 150 miles further. Now, 7,000 years of silt will do that. But it was, at the time, a port city, founded about 5400 BC. And according to the legend, this god Enki, who keeps showing up, was the one who founded this city. It was the site of the temple to Enki, which is this big ziggurat that archaeologists have discovered. This temple was the home of the Abzu, the Abzu, which means house of the sweet waters. This is where Marduk sent the Apkallu for punishment. Go down there into the Abzu and don't ever come back. In the Abzu, this pit below the temple, the god Enki was supposed to take the salt water from the Persian Gulf and turn it into the sweet waters of the Tigris and Euphrates necessary to life. Whenever you see a picture of Enki, he's the guy with the 2 streams full of carp flowing off his shoulders. Inconvenient at parties, but necessary, I guess, back in the day. The Abzu he shared with the Apkallu, who he trained to go out and teach civilization to humans. He also, Enki, that is, the god Enki, was known as the master of exorcists rituals. Whenever they were troubled by demons, Enki was the god who was supposed to have the answer to drive away evil. According to the Sumerian king list, the ancient histories, when the kingship first descended from heaven, it came to this city, Eridu. And in Eridu, a man named Alulim became the first king. The Bible actually bears this out, I think. The Bible tells us that when Cain was kicked out, when Cain was driven away from Adam and Eve, he went to the land of Nod, the land of wandering. Cain knew his wife, she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad. Now, there are some scholars who believe that the he in the second sentence there, when he built a city, was actually referring to Enoch and not Cain. The last word in that sentence, Enoch, could be a later gloss or addition, in which case, if it's correct, the builder of the first city was Enoch and not Cain. Which, when you think about it, makes sense. Cain went off to the land of wandering. He was a wandering guy. Building a city seems a little out of character. But here's another connection that a guy makes. Alulim, another compound word put together by the Sumerians, being a prefix, lu meaning man, and then lim from the Sumerian word limu meaning four. Fourth man. So you count the number of generations from the first man, Adam, Cain, Enoch, Irad, the city named for him, Eridu, Alulim, first king, first city. Just a biblical curiosity. I'm not going to die on this particular hill, but I think it's fascinating that this city, home of the temple to this god Enki, perhaps built by the son of Cain for his son. Now, what about that ziggurat there? The Abzu, home of Enki, source of the sweet waters. Enki, also a compound word. En means Lord. Ki was a Sumerian word that means earth. So Enki, Lord of the earth. Do you remember Jesus calling somebody the ruler of this world? Paul calling somebody the God of this world? Again, file a mental bookmark there. Oh yeah, Abzu. It's the word from which we get the word abyss. Enki, God of this world, God of the abyss.